Hi, and welcome to the, oh gosh, I think it must be the third video in the series. Yeah, so the first video we talked about gathering the requirements for this project. And on the second video we took those requirements and used them to design at least the entity relationships or the schema for the database that's going to sit behind what we're actually building. So just to recap, these are the user stories that we gathered together in the first video. All the things that we need to be able to do with our project management solution. And then the next video, we took those and built, as a result, this fairly simple entity relationship diagram, this schema of our database, how the various bits and pieces are going to relate to each other. And now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to build this. Now, everything we've covered up until now has been pretty much platform agnostic. It doesn't really care whether you're building this solution on a SQL server or on some kind of MySQL solution or some other platform. There are a number of different platforms that you can build this sort of thing on. In this case, because I'm a Salesforce consultant, I'm going to be building this on Salesforce. That's kind of where I live. So at this point it becomes slightly less platform agnostic. It's actually more specific to Salesforce. So in order to perform the next part, I've set up a dev account on Salesforce. Rewind. I have to say the intended target audience for these videos would be people who are already using Salesforce, whether through choice or because that's their job. So the chances are you already have a Salesforce org that you're working on, or that you have somehow inherited responsibility for. If you're watching these videos, the chances are someone's giving you a Salesforce system to look after, and you're kind of scratching your head over exactly what it is that you're going to do with it, and therefore you've gone off and Googled it and said, help me with the Salesforce system, and somehow nothing better came up and you found yourself watching this video. If that's the case, then you're in the right place. If, on the other hand, you haven't really worked with Salesforce before and you're intrigued and you'd like to give it a go, then I would recommend that you do what I did and sign up for a dev account as something to in your case play with, and in my case demonstrate the way that you would build a system on Salesforce. To do that, I'm just going to quickly fire up another tab here. If you go to developer.salesforce.com, I think that's it. Yeah, looks like I was right. Yes, of course, accept all cookies. Why would you not? You can click on Browse Trials, and one of the options, one of the early options at the list here is to sign up for Developer Edition. You click on that, and then you fill in your details. All this standard stuff. You fill in your details. Your username, which has to be in the form of an email address, but doesn't have to be the same as the email address that it's actually sending the login details to. When you click on Submit or Sign Me Up at the end, it will go boop boop boop, processing, and it will send you an email with your login details for your dev account. So if you haven't got a dev account, that's how you can get one. And through the magic of television, here's one I prepared earlier. Okay, this is the dev account that I signed up to a few days ago, and at the moment it doesn't really have anything set up at all. Well, a couple of things that I've been playing around with, but nothing set up for this project. So this is where we're going to build out our solution. And the way we do this is by looking at the diagram here and working out what we need to add. So this is the same diagram that we saw at the end of the previous video. What we have, just to recap for those of us who have forgotten, we have 3 custom objects plus a custom field on one of the standard objects. Okay, I haven't put a key for the color coding here, but it's very simple. The green objects are the custom objects that we're going to be adding onto the schema, and the blue object is a standard object that already exists. It's that simple. Okay, so and the way they relate to each other, we have a project that's sort of at the top of the tree, and then underneath the project we have a list of project tasks. Okay, and each project task is linked to one project, but each project can have any number of project tasks, which is why that line between the project and the project task is has one line at this end and 3 lines at this end. It's not saying 1 to 3, it's saying 1 to many. So you can have one project can have many tasks. Each task will be linked to one project. Okay. Similarly, one project can have any number of team members, but each team member will be linked to a single project. Okay. And also the project tasks will be assigned to a team member, and each team member can have any number of project tasks assigned to them. Okay. Now a team member is not the same as a user. So the person that logs into the system, that's not a team member. The team member is what we call a joining object. It's something which associates the user, which is the person that's logging in, to the project. Okay. And a joining object is used to represent a many-to-many relationship. So I could have done this as basically a line between the project and the user, which is a many-to-many connection, like that. Okay, so that many-to-many relationship, I sort of forgot to mention this last time, which is why I'm kind of recapping it now. That many-to-many relationship, that basically means each project can be associated with a number of users, and each user can have a number of projects. Okay, that's how you'd represent it in an ERD, but how you really represent it when you actually build the system, that line becomes a joining object, which in this case we're going to call the team member. Okay, so the team member is a joining object between the user and the project, and it represents this many-to-many relationship between those two things. The advantage of representing it as a joining object rather than just as a line with crow's feet at both ends is that you can actually start specifying what properties that joining object has. Okay, so in this case, for example, we've added the property of the rate, which is the amount of money that we're going to be charging for this team member while they're working on this project. Actually, that sort of raises the question we're going to be charging. We haven't really put anything in here for the actual time billed, okay, and that is something we're probably going to add later on. We'll extend this basic project structure by putting in the ability to actually bill for time. So we'll be adding a function to log time and to log expenses against the project. Okay, this is very basic. This is just representing a project with its list of tasks and assigning those tasks to team members, and then later on, okay, we're going to go through a process of, hey, hang on, we forgot, we're going to have to invoice for these projects. How do we invoice our time? Okay, that's a conversation which is going to come up. We're going to kind of do scope creep. Okay, so we're going to take this project that we're working on, and then the customer says, hey, we forgot to ask for this, so we need to kind of extend the project. But that's for the future. Okay, this is a spoiler. Anyway, leaving that aside, so yeah, these are the objects that we're going to be building, and this is the place where we're going to be building them. Okay, so the first thing I want to do before I actually get into the actual custom objects, the first simplest thing to do is to add this custom field to the existing user object. So there's already an object on the system called user, which is the person that logs in. And one of the things we want to define for the user is what's their standard rate. So for that user, what's the hourly rate that we would normally charge for their time? Okay. So we're going to add that as a custom field to a standard object, and then later on, after we've done that, we'll look at how we add the custom objects, and each of the custom objects will have their own sets of custom fields. So, starting at the beginning, looking at the user, adding the standard rate field, and we do that by switching over to Salesforce. Okay, and believe it or not, when we want to manage our objects in Salesforce, we do that by going to the Object Manager tab. Yeah. In fact, usually it's quicker just to type the name of the object you're looking for. So if I click on the user object, these are all the details of that user object. Okay, we can see the various fields that exist on the user object. Okay, we can see the page layouts which are there, and so on and so on. And we're not going to go into any of these details, don't worry. Okay, there's a ton of stuff in there. If you want to know about it, go to Trailhead and just knock yourself out. Okay, there's a ton of stuff you can do on Trailhead. It's a lot of fun. You can learn all about all this kind of stuff, and there's so many rabbit holes that you can disappear down. This, we're just going to add a custom field. So we're on the fields and relationships, This is a list of all the fields that exist on the user object, and you'll notice if I scroll down and down and down, there isn't one called rate because we haven't added it yet. So let's add it. So we're going to create a new field. So the first thing we need to decide is what kind of information is going into this field. Now this is going to be the default rate for this user, which is going to be a currency value, okay, as the field type for this. And we're going to call, what did we say we were going to call it? Standard rate. There we go. Okay, so the label for this field is going to be standard rate, okay. And how long do we need it to be? So this is the number of digits to the left of the decimal place, and then this is the number of digits to the right of the decimal point. Okay, so because most of our currencies, and actually for a currency value, this is really defined by which currency you're going to be using. But for the time being, we're going to give this a maximum of 16 digits before the dot, which is quite a lot. If that's your hourly rate, then congratulations, well done you. And 2 decimal places afterwards, which means that we can basically do pounds and pence, or euros and cents, or dollars and cents, or whatever makes sense. So standard rate is the name of the field. You'll notice also the field name, the label is standard rate with a space, the field name is standard underscore rate. Okay, what it will do is by default it will replace any spaces in your label with an underscore. Always a good idea to put in at least a description or a help text, so text rather. So in this case we're going to say the standard hourly rate we charge customers for this user's time. I think that's a pretty good description. Now, the difference between the two. Description, when you're looking at your list of custom fields, or your list of fields against the object, the description describes what that field does. The help text is like a little pop-up box. You know, when you hover over the field, you're not sure what it means, you see a little eye next to it, like this one here. You hover over it and a tooltip pops up. So the help text is the text in that tooltip. I'm just going to copy that actually and put it into the description as well, because we might find both of them useful. I'm not going to mark it as required because we will have users that don't have an hourly rate. We will have users who never get charged to customers, who are internal users only, and so on. So I'm not going to mark it as required. I will add it by default to any reports that have been set up for that include users. So I'll leave that tick box. Basically, we're taking all the default values for the rest of the things. If we had a standard rate for all of our users, so if we said, for example, by default everyone should start at 100 euros or dollars or pounds per hour, then we could actually set a default value for that field. And that means that any new users that we add to it will by default be charged at £100 an hour, say. So that's quite a useful thing. In this case, I'm going to leave that blank because I don't really want to set a default value here. Click on next. Okay. So the next thing is which user profiles should be able to see and to edit this field. Okay. In this case, I'm actually going to open this up to everybody. It's just easier that way. But you could say, for example, it's visible to for a field like this, you'd probably want to say it's visible to everybody, read only to most people, but editable by, for example, the system administrator and the HR person. I don't know, do we have an HR person? We don't have an HR person. So only certain types of users can actually set that default value for our users. In this case, I'm just going to leave it visible to everybody, editable by everybody. Click on next. Now, this is the next page is basically which user page layouts should this field be visible on. Okay, and again in this case I'm just going to say it's visible anytime you can see a user, whatever page layout it's using, you'll see this field. Okay, so that's that. Now if I had another field to add at this point to the user object, I could click on save and new and it would take me back to the beginning of this wizard. But I don't. In this case, I'm just going to be adding this one field to this object. So I'm going to click on save, and now if I scroll down, I will have what I call it, standard rate. There we go. So there's a standard rate field. You'll notice the API name for the standard rate field is standard underscore rate underscore underscore C. That underscore underscore C at the end is very, very important. That basically tells you this is a custom field. When we look next at adding custom objects, you'll notice that the API name for the object also has underscore underscore C on it as well. Okay, and it's basically a way of sort of telling that this is not one of the standard fields. This is something that has been added specifically as a custom change to this Salesforce org. Okay, it's usually underscore underscore C. I guess the C stands for custom. There are other things, you know, you might see underscore underscore E, for example, if it's a platform event, or underscore underscore X if it's an external object. But generally speaking, most things are underscore underscore C. Leave it at that. Okay. So that's our custom field. That was easy, yeah. And just to show you how it's worked, if I go back to the Home tab and go to the list of users and find a user, hey, here's me, there's me, okay. And let's say that my standard rate is going to be £100. Do you know what, actually, I haven't even looked at what the currency is on this particular org. It's probably pounds. Anyway, so there's my standard rate field. It worked, and it's got a little tooltip on it, so when I hover over that, it says the standard hourly rate we charge customers for this user's time. That worked. So in order to set my standard rate, the easiest way is just click on edit, scroll down until I find my standard rate field, and then just type in £100. That's how much I charge an hour, say. Click on save, and that's that. I've got my £100 an hour standard rate. Is that easy? Okay. So that's adding that field to this existing object. But we want to be able to add objects as well. And it's just as easy. So let's start with the project. Okay, so we're going to start with the project object. So I'm going to go back to my object manager. And over here on the right hand side, I've got the option to create custom object. There we go. So the first object we're going to create is the project. So the label for that is going to be project. No surprises there. The plural label, how do we say multiple of this thing? It's projects. Yeah, okay. Sounds obvious. It's not always obvious, okay, because first of all, this is not limited to the English language. So, you know, it could be Projekten, for example, with a K and EN on the end because it's plural and it's German. So, you know, there are certain plural forms of words that aren't just simply sticking S on the end. So, this is basically asking for how would you want this plural label. Where this is used mostly, where you're going to see that plural label mostly, is the tabs across the top of the page here. Okay, so once we've set this up, we're going to have a tab for projects. Okay, and the tab will say projects. The table is going to be called project. That's your project table. But when you look at the tab on the user interface, that tab will be labeled using this plural label. Okay, that's the main place where you're going to see that actually used. So the label for the object is project. How we describe multiple of that is projects. That's easy enough. It doesn't start with a vowel sound. Again, this is just so that the automatically generated help text puts an instead of a before the thing, a project or an apple. Yeah, this is one of those things. So yeah, and the object name, this is the API name again, because there are no spaces in this project, in this object's label, it hasn't put any spaces in here. When it's actually added, it will be project underscore underscore C. Don't stick the underscore underscore C on here, just leave it with the default value, it'll all be good. Okay. Description, again, good habit to get into, you know, giving it a bit of a description so that, again, if you get hit by a bus, or for whatever reason you're no longer responsible for supporting the thing that you built, whoever comes along after you and has to pick up the pieces will have a better idea of why you did what you did. So in this case, this represents projects that we are working. There's probably a better way of expressing it, but that'll do for now. The context-sensitive help, we'll just use the standard help page. The record name. Okay, so this is every object in Salesforce has a name field. Okay, that's one of the standard fields that you kind of get out of the box for free. It's always called name, and in most cases you will want to have a descriptive name. This is what you see when you have a link to that record. So if I've got a contact record, for example, and I want to see a link to the account of the company that they work for, the link that you can click to open up the company will have the company's name in it. Okay, it won't have the ID or anything like that. It will have the name of the company. So this is what you will see when you link to this project from something else. Okay. So it's important to make it something that's fairly meaningful in most cases. If you've got something like a time card entry, okay, you don't want to have to name all your time card entries. Your time card entries are going to be auto-numbered. They're going to be TC-0000358 or whatever, okay? So in that case, the name would be, we would use the auto-number option for that. But for a project, we're going to want to name our projects. You know, you're going to be saying, are you working on the Johnson project? And then the person says, no, I'm not, that's Fred you're thinking of, or whatever. So we're going to want to call it the project, an actual project name, and I can't think of a better label for the name of the project than project name. So that was a fairly long-winded way of saying we're going to leave it called project name, and we're going to call it text. But in some cases, and we'll see this, you know, later on when we do the spoiler bit about the time cards, we will see also number being used as well, or rather instead. But in this case, we're going to name our projects, and we're going to do it using text, and that's all good. Then we have some optional features. Are we going to want to be able to run reports on our projects? You betcha we are. In fact, there's something on the requirements here saying we want to be able to generate reports. There we go. So, yes, we want to be able to run reports. Do we want to allow activities related to our projects? I think we probably are, actually, because again, you know, we want to be able to collaborate with team members, and that's probably going to involve things like adding tasks or activities to our projects. So, yes, in this case, we want to be able to allow activities. Do we want to be able to track field history? This basically means you know, we can set certain fields and record essentially like an audit trail of whenever that field changes, we log that the field was changed at this date and time from this value to this value by this user. Okay, useful thing to be able to do for a number of reasons, not least of which is accountability. And in this case, again, I think it might be useful to be able to have like a history of when this project changed from one status to another, for example, or when it started, when it finished, whatever. So I'm going to say yes, we want to be able to track field history. You don't really lose anything by enabling it, but you know, it basically adds a standard related list to the layout. Do we want to allow chatter on this object? Yes, we do. And then object classification. When these settings are enabled, okay, so the rest of these values, I'm basically going to leave the default values. Okay, so this stuff, I don't care. Deployment status, yeah, we're going to go straight to deployment. Okay, you can kind of build objects and work on them as an admin, and only admins can see it. Until you're ready to go, hey guys, here's all these new things we've built. But actually, if you're going to do that, you probably are better off just building the whole thing in a sandbox. This is what you should do anyway. Build it in a sandbox and then release it whenever it's ready to go. This is just, to me, this is more steps to go through, moving things from in development into deployed so that the users can see them. So I generally go straight to deployed, but I might be deploying in a sandbox first, testing it there, and then deploying into production later on, maybe over a weekend. Anyway, do we want to be able to search for our projects? Again, generally speaking, I'm going to say yes to allow search. You want to be able to type in Johnson project and for Salesforce to find the Johnson project. And it won't do that if you haven't allowed search for the project object. So yes, in this case, we're going to allow search. Yeah, I'm going to want to be able to attach files and things to it, so I'm going to say add notes and attachments. And also, I think it would be useful to have a new tab for this. So I'm going to say launch new. So I'm basically ticking everything for this particular object. Click on save. And so then, because I ticked yes, I want to create a new tab, the next thing I have to do is define this new tab. Okay, so The object that we're adding the tab for is the project object we just added. The style of the tab, this is cute. So then the tab style selector will come up, and you can basically choose which style, what kind of graphic and color combination you want. Yes, I'm going to go with factory because I kind of like that industrial style. So there we go, it's a factory. That's what we use to represent our project. It doesn't really make any difference to anything. It's just, you know, when you're looking at the tab, it's got the, you know, this icon at the top here will be a stylized factory. That's really all that it's doing. So done that, click on next. Which user profiles should have visibility of this? Now you can apply the same visibility to all your profiles, or you can also say actually only certain people, only certain types of users should see this. In this case, again, I'm going to just say everybody gets it by default. Okay, so I'm going to say default on and click on next. And then, you know, if you've got apps set up, we have a number of standard apps obviously set up on this particular dev org. This is basically saying we want to add this tab to whichever apps we've got set up. At the end of this process, we're going to actually create our own custom app, and we'll add all these various different things to that. But for the time being, I'm going to just say I'm going to include it in all the existing apps because I can't be bothered changing that. So there we go, that's done. We've got a new project object. There it is, it's good. Let's say if I go to the sales app in a new tab, okay, we should have in here a projects tab. There you go. So that's our projects tab that we've added. Okay. At the moment, we don't have any projects actually defined. So if I look at all the projects, it's an empty list. Okay, that's a shame, but we will add to this. Okay, so we'll, and also you'll see there, that's the tab thing I was talking about. So it's got a little factory to represent our projects. That's really all that did. So that's our project object added, and what do we do next? The next thing we do is we add all these fields. Okay, so we've already got the name field. That's a standard field whenever you define an object. Okay, so we've got certain fields are always there by default. Okay, first of all, there's one which isn't listed, which is the ID, but then we've got the project name, the name field. So this is the it's an 80 character field, always 80 characters of text, and it's just what is the name of this project. We've got the owner, which can basically be either a user or a queue. Usually it's a user. We've got created and last modified by. Okay. What's also hidden in the background is the created date and the last modified date, which are actually date time. So that would be who created this record and when was it last modified and by whom, and then you've got who owns it, and then you've got the name of the project, and that's all you get kind of out of the box for a new object. Okay, and that's not really enough. We've already established there's a bunch of other stuff that we want to be able to put in for our projects. So let's start with the first of the custom fields, which is description. So the description field, I think it's probably a good idea to have a nice long description field. So we're going to make this a long text. So we're on the fields and relationships tab already. We're going to click on new, and we're going to add a text area long field. Okay, you'll see there are actually a number of different fields that relate to text. Okay, so there's text, just plain, which is a line of text up to 255 characters long. Okay, 255, there's a reason for that. It's technical, and that is it's just a line of text that can be up to 255 characters, and that's all it is. Text area is still limited to 255 characters, but it can be on multiple lines, so you can type a bit and then enter and then a little bit. That's quite often useful for summaries. Now then you get onto the text area long, which can be up to 130,000 characters long, and it can be on multiple lines obviously as well. So that's where you get to write a whole essay. Now the reason why you've got a text area and a text area long is important. Okay, there are limits to what you can do with a text area long field, and that also applies to the rich text and the encrypted as well. So for example, you cannot filter records based on the contents of a long text field. Yeah? But you can filter based on the contents of a text area or a text field. So if, for example, you wanted to list all of the projects that had the word develop in the description, okay, you wouldn't be able to do that. You wouldn't be able to filter on that value if you were using a long text field, but you would be able to filter on it if it's a text area or a text field. In this case, the description, we're probably not going to want to filter on that, so actually, and also we might well need more than 255 characters to fully describe this project. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to assume that the description is a text area long field. Okay, so then we go next, and the label for the field is description. Okay, and I think we're going to be safe to limit it to 4,000. Cute thing, you can say 4K and Salesforce will understand that as meaning 4,000, which is sweet. On the page layout, I'm going to give this 4 lines to edit it over, and the field name will be description. Okay, so that's easy enough. We want to include it in any custom reports that already exist. Click on next. And again, my default security settings are going to be visible to everybody, read only to none. Click on next. And we only have one page layout for the project at the moment, so that's the one that it's going to be included on. Click on save and new because we have more fields to add. Okay, and then we're back at the start of the process again. What's the next field we want to add? That would be the status. Okay, so the status is going to be a pick list. We're going to have a number of different possible values for the status, and we don't want any values that are outside of that list. Okay, so here we go. It's a pick list field. And then we click on next. The field label is going to be status, and we could define a global pick list set and use the same set of statuses for a number of different things. Sometimes that's a relevant thing to do. In this case, I think the statuses for a project will be different from the statuses, for example, for a project task. So I'm going to just say, I'm going to enter my values here, and I'm not going to do it as a global pick list value set. And the statuses for a project would be planned, so this is a project that we're considering, active, which is a project that's actually running. We might have a project which is on hold. Yep. What else? Project might be completed. This is the happy path. Well, the happy path is we plan it, then it's active, and then it's completed and everything's great. And then there might be a status of cancelled or abandoned. I'm going to say abandoned. Now, you can display the values alphabetically, which in some cases does make sense. So if you're searching through a whole list of countries, for example, then yeah, you might want to have those sorted alphabetically. But if it's something which is sequential, as in this case, okay, this is a sequence of possible statuses, and most projects will go from this to this to this to this to this, then it doesn't make sense to sort those alphabetically. Okay, you do them in the order that you would expect them to arrive. In this case, we're not displaying it alphabetically. We are going to use the first value as the default value, in fact. So by default, when we create a brand new project, it's going to default to planned. Okay. When you edit this field later on, you can actually set a different value as the default if that's appropriate. But for this, in this case, we've made the first item in the list the default anyway, because that's the way things go. It's a sequence, so that actually makes sense. Now this option here, restrict pick list to the values defined in the value set. This is usually, it's a good idea usually to tick this. One thing you should bear in mind is if at some point you find yourself importing data into this object, and one of the statuses isn't included in the value set, then that will fail for those records that have the wrong value. Whereas if you're importing data, and it doesn't matter too much what the pick list values are, if you don't tick that box, then you can actually import values that don't belong to the pick list. Even though you can't select them from the pick list, you can still populate that field with a value that's not in the pick list. It can also be set by workflows to a value that's not in the pick list. So in some cases, that's actually something that you might not want to be able to, to bypass. But in this case, we want to keep this as the strict set of statuses that we want to be able to define. on further consideration, here's the thing. Again, this is going to be ultimately something that I will allow people to download and install on their systems if they want to. And when they do, they might actually find statuses that they want to populate it with that have not been included in this list, and then it might fail. So in order to avoid, nightmares for those people in the future, I'm going to take this off. But normally, I would probably keep that one ticked. It should be a required field. This is something that we should know, the status for any given project. Okay, so I'm okay to tick this as required. I like to keep a minimum of fields required, because every required field is a barrier to people entering the data on the system. Okay. Actually, what I would usually do is, for some of these fields that the business wants to have filled in, okay, I would put in a validation rule. We'll see those later on. Instead, that would say, once you get past this stage, these fields need to be filled in, but you can still save the record without those fields filled in, as long as you don't go past that stage yet. Yeah. That way, you know what you don't know. You've got the record and there's some information missing, so you know you need to chase that up before you get to the end of the process. Okay. In this case, every project should have a status, no exceptions. So I am going to make this one required, but I tend to do this lightly. Also, we want to add it to the report type. That's always ticked, basically. And we've already said that the default value is going to be the first value there, so that's fine. Click on next, and that's the status field. We are adding it to everybody. Because it's a required field, it's going to be visible to everybody. Next. And it's going to be on the project layout. In fact, it's going to be on all the page layouts because it's a required field. So therefore, yeah. Again, save and next. What's the next field? The start date. That's a nice easy one. That's a date field. Date. Next. And it's going to be start date. And again, the field name is going to be start underscore date, and it will add the underscore C at the end of it. And that's really all you need for a date field. That's pretty easy. It's not required. I'm not going to make this one required. Again, if we go back, we might know that we definitely have a project that we need to start planning, but we don't know when we're going to start it yet. Okay, so we might have to define the project before we know when it's starting. So I'm not going to make the start field a required field. But we might say that before it becomes active, we have to have defined the start date. Yeah? There. So in this case, start date not required. That's all we need, is just the name. Click on next. Make it visible to everybody. Next. And it's on the layout. Save new. And then the next one is going to be the end date. So again, this is another date. Not date and time. This is just the date. And it's going to be end date. And again, none of the rest of this is relevant, so we're going to go next and visible to everybody and save and new. And what's the last one? Project manager. Okay, project manager is going to be one of the users. Okay, we're just going to assume that whoever is managing the projects needs to be a user of Salesforce. So we're looking for a lookup relationship, and it's the lookup to the user object, all the way down near the bottom. Not that far. Here we go. To the user. And this is going to be project manager. Okay. Now, child relationships name basically means that if we're looking at the user and we want to see the list of projects that they're managing, that will be listed as projects. It's that easy. And click on next. The project manager field should be visible to everybody, and I'm going to leave it editable by everybody because, yeah. And we'll add the project manager to the project layout field and then click on save. Good. And that's actually all the fields that we have defined for the project at this point. There we go. So now if we go to the All Projects tab, we don't have any yet, but if I click on New, there's my new project. Okay, we've got the name, we've got the description, we've got the status. That's the pick list that we defined. Planned, active, on hold, completed, abandoned. We've got the start date, the end date, and a lookup to the user object that allows us to say who is the project manager. Pretty easy, not too difficult. Yeah, happy with this? Because I am. You'll also notice that the project name is required, and so is the status. That means that it's got that little asterisk next to it. That means you can't save it without that information. Okay, so this is the test project. Okay, which is a test project to test the project. Okay, and the status of this is currently planned. Actually, no, it's active now. We're working on it. So there you go. And the start date is today, and the end date is, well, in a week. Who can say? And the project manager is me. And then we hit save, and there's our project. Yeah, easy. So, but there's not much more to it really. That's the project. But you know, where's all our tasks? Where's all our people? We can see we've got a place here to put notes and attachments, so we can upload files and design specs and all that stuff. We've got an activity section over here, so I can schedule tasks or events, send emails, that sort of stuff. But other than the details of the project itself, this is pretty light. First thing to mention, having all the fields down the side here, that's just an artifact of how the system gets set up by default. We can then, probably in the next video, we'll look at page layouts and how we can adjust things and how things can go and move around and make it prettier. But, by default, we get all the fields that we've added in the order that we added them, just down the left-hand side. And at the moment, there's nothing related because over here, there is nothing related. We haven't built the project task yet. We haven't built the team member yet. So there's nothing related to the project. All we've built is the project, and that's where we are. So what do we add next? Let's do the project task next. No, let's not do the project task yet, because the project task has a lookup to the team member, and we don't have a team member yet. So actually, let's do the team member next. That makes more sense. So back to project, or back to the setup tab. And we are going to go back to the object manager, and we're going to create another custom object. And this custom object is going to be called team member. So the label is going to be team member. I'm going to make it capital M because it's a title. The plural label will be team members. There we go. Doesn't start with a vowel. We want to use the standards help. The team member name, I'm going to keep it as text, and we will finesse this later on. Okay, so we're going to put in a little thing that automatically fills in the team member name for us. Yeah, but for the time being, we're going to keep that as a text field. Then we're going to have, we want to be able to report on team members. Yes, we do. We want to be able to say these are the things that these people are involved with, so that's useful. We will not associate activities with the team member. It's just the joining object. Remember back here, okay, this is just the object that joins projects to users. We want to be able to report on it because that lets us do a list of all the projects that this user is working on, or a list of all the users that are working on this project. Those are useful reports to be able to do, but there's not a lot else that we want to do with this joining object. We want to be able to say what the specific rate is that we're charging for this team member for this project, but other than that, there's really not very much else going on here. Okay, so when we come to build the object, yes, we want to be able to report on it. We don't want to schedule activities against that record. Okay, so that's a no. We probably don't want to track field history. Unless there's a status field, for example, unless we want to be able to say this person is active on this project or not active on this project. That's another thing later on. But for the time being, yeah, we're going to say we're not tracking field history. We don't need to chatter on it, and all the rest of it, blah, blah, blah. We probably don't want to search on it because we're going to be searching on users or searching on projects, but not searching on kind of individual team members. We don't need to put notes and attachments on it, nor do we need a custom tab, okay? Because when we look at our team members, we're going to be looking at the project and seeing who's a member of the team. So we need a projects tab, but we don't need another tab next to it for all the team members. Yeah, the team members will be a property of the project. So actually, all these tick boxes we're not ticking. Clicking on save, and there's our team member object. Easy, okay? So now, this relationship from the team member to the project, that's going to be another lookup, but it's not. Okay, actually, this is going to be a special kind of lookup. This is going to be what we call a master detail relationship. Master detail relationships basically are kind of like a lookup, but stricter. Okay, so you cannot create a team member without a project. And that sort of makes sense. It wouldn't make sense to have a team member that's not working on a project. You can have users who aren't currently working on projects, but you wouldn't have a user's assignment to a project that's not on a project. See what I mean? I've just thought of something we need to add to this, because the people that are working the project, one of the things that we want to know about them is, this really should have been one of the user stories, okay? The people that are working on the project, they should really have a role. We should have some idea of what they're doing on the project, yeah? Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. I feel like an idiot because this really belonged like 2 videos ago. And normally it would have been, but I kind of made this up as I went along. So here, we really should have a role for these team members. What are they actually doing? The reason why this occurred to me is the relationship from the team member to the project, that should be always there. So you can't have a team member that's not related to a project. But you might have a team member where we don't know the user yet. Okay, so we might know that this project is going to need a project manager, but we don't know who's available to be the project manager for this project yet. So we might know that we've got to have a team member who has the role of project manager, but this value may not be filled in yet. Okay, so we know that they're on this project, and we know they have a role of project manager, but we don't know who's actually filling that role yet. So there is a theoretical possibility that we might have a team member without a user. Okay, so this relationship is going to be a master detail relationship. This is necessary. This relationship will be a lookup because it may not be filled in. Okay, so back over here. Team member, we want to have our fields and relationships. So the first field, the first relationship that we're adding is going to be a master detail relationship. And that is going to be to the project. Finger slipped. To the project object, okay? The default label is the name of the thing that you're linking to, which in this case is project, and that's fine. You know, it's good to call the field project because that makes sense. So, so yeah, we're going to call the field project. We want people who have at least read-only access to the project to be able to add team members or edit the existing team members. Okay, so this basically means as long as you can see the project, you can add team members to it. I'm also going to allow reparenting because you never know when you might need it. Back in the day, way back in the midst of time, you couldn't reparent a master detail relationship. Once you had the parent, it was always going to be that parent, and there was no way to change it, and that was a pain. That's good. Click on next, and visible to everybody, read only to nobody because it's a required field. It has to be, and it's going to be on the page layout. Whatever we do. Now, on the project, we will now have a related list. Okay, so what we're going to find when we look at the project is we're going to now have a list of team members associated with the project, and that related list is going to be called team members. Okay, and it will be added to the project layout, and so yeah, that's good. So now click on Save and New. And what's the next field we want to add? We've done the project ID. Next is going to be the, I've called it project ID, but actually I called the field project. Same thing's going to go here. I've called it user ID, but it's actually going to be called user. So the user lookup, if you remember, we said we might not know the user that's filling this role yet, so we're going to use a lookup rather than master detail. So going back, it's a lookup relationship, and it's to the user object. There we go. Going to whiz through this now. Okay, so we're going to call it user. The field name will be user as well. That's all we need for this one. Click on next. We want it to be visible to everybody. We want it to be read only to nobody. Click on next. And we want it to be on the team member layout. It's important that it's there. So click on Save and New again. Next, we want to have their rate. Actually, I'm going to put the role first and then the rate. So the next one is going to be the role, which is going to be a pick list field. And then next. So this is the role, and again, okay, so what user roles can we think of, or what roles can we think of in a project? So we've got project manager. What else? So we might have the architect. We might have the developer. We might have a solution engineer. We might have a business analyst, etc. I mean, okay, I come from a professional services background, so these are the sorts of titles that I'm thinking of. Whatever roles are appropriate for your particular type of project, these are the different roles that you might have for a project, and we're not going to display them alphabetically. We're not going to use the first one as a default value. We don't really have a default value for this in this case. I'm not going to restrict the pick list for this one, and I am going to say that it is required. Yeah, we're going to make this a required field. Anyone who's added to the project, we have to know why they're added to the project. We need to know what role they are filling in that project. Even if it's other. Oh, I forgot other. No, I'm not going to put other. That's rubbish. No other. But if you've got other there, then even if it's other, we need to know what role they're filling. So yeah, that's that. So next, and next, and then save and new, and then again, hang on, oh yeah, and again we want to have a currency field, which is for their hourly rate. Did I say hourly rate or daily rate for the user? I think I said hourly rate, pretty sure, I'll check. Hourly rate, okay, and this again is going to be 16 by 2. And we're going to say, by the way, I'm not filling in the descriptions anymore. It's a bad habit. It's a good habit to fill in the descriptions, but I'm kind of, I'm sensing that everyone who's watching this video is probably getting bored of watching me burble and type, so I'm not typing in any more of this. The hourly rate is not required because we might have some people who aren't actually charging an hourly rate, so we're going to leave that as not required. Click on next, and click on visible to everybody, next, and save. There you go. Okay, now if we go back to the object manager and back to the project again, project, okay, and then we look at page layouts and look at the project layout. Okay, now so strictly speaking, these things are defined, or should be defined more on the lightning record pages these days. But this is still a handy place to set the default layouts in. Okay, one of the things that we see here are the related lists. So this is the list of things that are related to the project. Okay, so we're looking at the project, we're looking at the page layout for the project, and within that page layout, we're looking at the related lists. And now, among the related lists, along with the open activity history, the notes and attachments, we've now got team members as well. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that up to the top of the list of lists, okay, because it's probably the more relevant information. And at the moment, all it's showing is the name of the team member, okay, and what we want to do is add, or is configure this related list and add the rest of the fields into it. So we want to know the name of the team member. We want to know the user. Actually, we're going to start with the role. We're going to have the user that's filling that role, and we're going to have their hourly rate. Okay. The rest of this stuff we don't really care about. Okay. We might care possibly about when they were last modified, but we probably don't in this case. So we're going to just leave all that stuff off. This is the information that we're interested in for our team members within the project. So that's fine. Okay. Click on OK. Also, while I'm here, I'm just going to kind of take the start date and the end date and move them over here. Move the owner down here because it's slightly less interesting. Put the project manager over here. That sort of tidied things up a little bit. There we go. Click on save and click on yes and we is done. Right, so now if I go back to my test project, and okay, this may not work instantly. Lightning has a habit of caching. So the page layout updates don't always work, but hey, in this case it did. So now we've tweaked our page layout. So we've got the name of the project, we've got the description and the status, and then the start date and the end date, and then over here under related now, we have our team members. And if we click on new, we can add a new team member. So we can say David, the PM. I'll probably put in something, we'll discuss this later on in a later video about how we can automate certain things. We will almost certainly automate the definition of the team member name field with some kind of a combination of what's underneath here. Yep. So this is a test project. The user is going to be me. The role I'm filling is project manager, and my hourly rate, again, there'll be automation to set this by default once the user is set, but I'm going to say my hourly rate is 100. Click on save, and there we go. So now we've got my team member. It's that easy. Yeah, okay. Back to our diagram. So we've done this bit. So the next one to do is project task. I'm going to do this outside the video. Okay, you've suffered enough, I feel. I've kind of gone through the process of the team member. The process for project task is going to be basically more or less the same. So I'm going to take this video to an end now. Thank you very much for all of your time and your attention. I'll fill in the project task, fill in all the various different fields and the relationships and everything else. If anything arises when I'm doing that I think I should have mentioned and explained, I'll cover that at the start of the next video. But in the meantime, like I say, thank you very much for your time and your attention, everybody. I hope this has been useful and interesting, and yeah, and I hope that you'll join me in the next one when that comes up. All right, thank you very much. Take care.